So it is decided. Humanity will be erased.
Everyone always asks me how the world ended. They imagine a great war, a final glorious battle that tore the galaxy apart. They are wrong. The world did end, but it ended quietly, with arrogant men in gilded rooms failing to see the storm on the horizon. My story isn't about the end of the world. It's about what came after. And for me, it all began with a piece of junk on a forgotten moon. History isn't written by the victors. It's written by the survivors who are left to tell the tale. My story and the story of the entire galaxy didn't begin in a grand chamber of power or with the roar of a starship's engine. It began in a junkyard on a forgotten moon. They called it a graveyard, and for good reason. My home was a barren, rust-colored world where empires came to dump their failures. For as far as the eye could see, the skeletons of forgotten titans littered the landscape. Warships twisted into silent screams, cruisers split open like metallic seed pods. The sky itself was a permanent, hazy orange from the metal dust kicked up by the lonely winds. That wind was the only sound you'd ever hear, a constant whistle through the hollow hulls of ships that once carried thousands. It was a world built for giants, and I was just a small ghost haunting its ruins. As a child, I spent my days climbing through their metal bones, a scavenger looking for anything useful. A working power conduit, a still intact memory chip, a simple thermal coil, these were the treasures of my world. One cycle, while prying at a stubborn panel on a derelict frigate, my favorite multi-tool slipped from my grasp. It clattered down a dark shaft and into the shadowy guts of the machine. With a sigh, I squeezed into the tight opening to retrieve it. My fingers, calloused from prying at rusted metal, brushed against something else. Something cold. Something smooth. In a place where every surface was sharp, jagged, or coated in a film of grit, this was an impossibility. I pulled it out from the darkness and into the dim orange light. It was a perfect rectangle of midnight, a small box that felt heavy in my hands. There were no seams, no scratches, not a single speck of dust clinging to its flawless surface. It was an anomaly, a silent, perfect thing in a universe of decay. It felt ancient, yet brand new. My curiosity, a dangerous thing on a world of sharp edges, took over. I tried to pry it open, to find a latch or a button, but there was nothing. Shaking it yielded only silence. As I turned it over and over, my thumb rested on a smooth, flat section in its center. Instantly, a delicate tracery of blue light flared to life, a thin vein of cool fire outlining my thumbprint. It scanned the print for a second, the light pulsing gently before it faded away, leaving the box as dark and silent as before. It remained locked. Back then, I just thought it was a broken toy. I didn't know that I had found a lock and that its key belonged to no one in my world. I had found the relic of a ghost, and the entire galaxy was about to pay the price for making them a myth. The black box slept silently in my room, a shard of forgotten midnight, but the universe outside did not. Before the forgotten returned, another darkness rose, a creeping plague that would test the galaxy's protectors and find them weak. It would show us all just how fragile their promises truly were. From my quiet corner of the galaxy, I watched the horror unfold on the public comms feeds. The story was always the same. It began as a whisper, a rumor of a lost colony, a freighter that vanished without a distress call. Then came the first fragmented images. We called them the Taryx Swarm. They weren't an empire or an army, they were a tide. A living, breathing tide of grotesque organic ships that moved as one. I watched a news feed of the Council's mighty 7th Fleet engaging the swarm near the Cadian Nebula. The Council ships were sleek, silver instruments of power, firing lances of brilliant light into the approaching darkness. For every swarm vessel they vaporized, 2 more would take its place. It wasn't a battle, it was a body trying to fight off a virus. The neat formations of the Council fleet broke, and one by one the silver ships were engulfed, swallowed by a chittering cloud of biological horrors that tore them apart from the inside out. The feed cut to static. Another broadcast showed the jewel of the outer rim, the city planet of Cyrene, with its spires of crystal and light that touched the clouds. An hour later, the feed returned, showing the same planet. The spires were now broken, skeletal fingers clawing at a sky thick with black smoke. Swarm vessels, like bloated insects, hung over the destruction like vultures waiting for the last signs of life to fade. The final images were always the most painful. I saw desperate lines of refugees, their faces hollow, streaked with grime and tears. They crowded onto massive transport ships, clutching a single bag or the hand of a child, their eyes fixed on the home they were leaving behind forever. They were the lucky ones. And where were our great protectors during all of this? Where was the Galactic Council? They were in their grand chamber, a place of gleaming marble floors and holographic chandeliers, arguing. The proceedings were broadcast to show their supposed diligence, but all we saw was their impotence. I remember watching General Kalen, an old, decorated warrior with a jaw set like granite, pleading for a decisive counterattack. "The swarm follows predictable hive patterns," he boomed, his fist striking the holographic map. "We can gather the 3rd, 5th, and 9th fleets for a preemptive strike at their suspected core world. A single decisive blow." He was answered by Emissary Valerius, a slick diplomat whose robes probably cost more than my entire settlement. "A campaign of that magnitude is fiscally irresponsible and politically reckless, General," Valerius said smoothly, as if discussing a trade dispute. "The Senate would never approve such a budget. The risk of losing 3 fleets is unacceptable. The risk of losing the galaxy is what's unacceptable," Kalen roared back. While they argued, the broadcast camera panned across the other delegates. I saw one, a powerful syndicate leader, discreetly typing on a private datapad. For a split second, the screen's reflection was visible, and I could read the words, "Prepare the family vessel. Route uncharted territories. Utmost secrecy." He wasn't trying to save the galaxy. He was just packing his bags. Another leader stood to make a passionate speech, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "My people's safety is my first priority," he declared. We all knew he meant his own safety. The galaxy burned while they debated the cost of water to put out the fire. The true cost, however, was not measured in credits or ships. On a newsreel from the front lines of the planet Viridia, I saw it. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of ozone. A lone Zarthani warrior, their forearms trembling with exhaustion, leaned against a shattered wall. I watched as their last squad mate was torn apart by a skittering swarm creature, no bigger than a dog. The warrior raised their rifle, aiming for the creature, and pulled the trigger. Click. The sound was too quiet to be heard, but I saw it in their posture. The rifle was empty. The warrior slowly lowered the weapon. The camera zoomed in on their face, and I saw their expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was a complete and utter emptiness. The look of a being whose hope has just died. The council had failed. They had proven that their throne was built on empty promises and their power was a hollow shell. They had created a power vacuum, a void that would soon be filled by a storm far greater than the Taryx Swarm. And so it came to pass, on the darkest day, when the council's capital world, Coruscant Prime, was about to become just another tombstone in the Swarm's graveyard. Hope was a dead language. The fleets were broken. The government was in chaos. And on the bridge of the Indomitable, the last flagship defending the planet, every officer was simply waiting for the end. The air was thick with the scream of proximity alerts and the grim acceptance of defeat. The Taryx Swarm, a monstrous wave of living ships, was closing in for the final kill. Then the sky spoke. Not with an answer to a prayer, but with a scar carved into the fabric of reality. "Report!" the fleet admiral barked, his voice strained. What was that energy reading? A sensor officer, his face pale, looked up from his console. "Sir, it's not a ship. It's a space-time distortion. A tear, it's not natural." Outside the bridge's viewport, it happened. A point of light tore open into a gaping wound of brilliant, impossible blue. It didn't explode. It simply unfolded, a silent, violent rip in the universe that bled the light of some other place. Every sensor on the bridge went wild, then overloaded. An unnatural silence fell. On the tactical map, even the chaotic tide of the swarm seemed to halt, its countless vessels pausing as if in confusion and awe. From the shimmering blue wound they emerged. They weren't elegant like the ships of the Council, or grotesque like the swarm. They were brutal. Angular, gray, and scarred, they were wedges of cold iron that absorbed the light around them. They bore no insignia, flew no colors, and moved with a terrifying synchronized precision. They were not ships designed for comfort or art. They were pure instruments of war, forged in a hell we couldn't imagine. They moved from the rift and into a perfect battle formation, a silent wall of judgment facing both the swarm and the Council's last defenders. On the bridge of the Indomitable, confusion turned to dread. Who were they? A new enemy? Some unknown power joining the fray? Then came the signal. It wasn't a voice. It was a line of code, ancient and simple, broadcast on all open frequencies. An old gray-haired specialist on the bridge, a xenolinguist pulled from retirement for the war, stumbled back from his console as if he'd been struck. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It cannot be. That's the old human distress beacon. The code of the lost. But that's impossible. They're extinct. A myth." As he spoke, a voice followed the signal. It wasn't a shout, nor was it a threat. It was calm, steady, and heavy with the weight of forgotten centuries. It echoed across every comms channel, in every cockpit, and on every public broadcast, cutting through the static of war. "We are the forgotten. We have returned." The fleet admiral stared, his mouth agape. The arrogant diplomat, Valerius, who had been observing from the back, took an involuntary step backward. A myth, a ghost story told to frighten new recruits. And now that ghost story had a voice and a fleet of warships hanging in their sky. The Taryx Swarm, a creature of pure instinct and aggression, recovered from its confusion first. With a screech that overloaded audio sensors, its massive command ship, a monstrosity of flesh, and chitin the size of a small city, fired a lance of incandescent bioplasma. The green-black beam screamed across the void, aimed directly at the lead vessel of the unknown fleet. The Council officers braced for an impact that would have vaporized any ship they knew. But it never came. The human ship didn't even try to evade. Its shielding didn't flare or shatter. It simply absorbed the blast. The point of impact rippled silently across the ship's dark hull like a stone tossed into a black lake, and then it was gone. There was a moment of absolute silence across the battlefield. The swarm had thrown its best punch, and the ghost hadn't even blinked. And then the ghost punched back. There were no grand energy beams, no elegant lances of light. There was just silence. And then from the human flagship came streaks of pure white light. They were solid objects, kinetic rounds fired at unimaginable speeds, so fast they seemed to simply erase the space between them and their target. Before the swarm command ship could even register the attack, the rounds hit. There was no sound, no fiery explosion in the vacuum of space. The massive biological vessel just came apart. It was annihilated, shattered into a billion silent pieces of frozen flesh and armor, plating in less than a second. The human fleet didn't pause. It didn't broadcast a victory cry or make a demand. It simply began to move forward, a wall of silent, gray death, and continued its work. It ignored the Council's ships completely. Its attention focused solely on the Taryx Swarm. They didn't fight like we did. They didn't waste a single movement or an extra word. They executed their enemies with the cold, relentless efficiency of a law of nature. On that day, a legend died and a far more terrifying truth was born. We waited for the conquest. After the swarm was broken over Coruscant Prime, we expected the victors to make their demands. We expected them to storm the council chambers, to declare themselves the new masters of the galaxy. But the ghosts who returned from the dead did not behave like tyrants. They behaved like inheritors, coming to collect a debt that had been forgotten for far too long. From the observation deck of a council station, I watched the aftermath unfold on the main tactical display. It was a map of the galaxy, a silent, three-dimensional tapestry of stars. The territories controlled by the Taryx Swarm were marked in a sickly, spreading red. Then the human fleets, marked as cool blue icons, began to move. They didn't engage in grand, prolonged battles. They moved with a chilling purpose, like a surgeon's scalpel cutting away a disease. The blue dots would enter a red sector, and a short time later, the red would simply vanish. No drawn-out sieges, no frantic reports of desperate last stands. Just clean, quiet, and absolute results. The Council, in a panic, tried desperately to open a dialogue. They sent hails on every known frequency, from formal diplomatic requests to panicked, open pleas. They were met with nothing. The humans ignored them completely. Their silence was a weapon far more terrifying than any cannon. It was the silence of a predator that has already chosen its prey and sees no need for conversation. Then they did something even more unsettling. On the planet Kithra, one of the first worlds they had liberated, The survivors were huddled in the ruins of their cities, starving and afraid. They watched as human shuttles descended from the sky, their dark, angular shapes blocking out the sun. The people of Kithra braced themselves for occupation, for conquerors to step out and claim their prize. The shuttle doors hissed open. The people held their breath. But the figures who emerged were not soldiers ready for a fight. They were engineers in practical work suits and medics carrying advanced medical kits. Without a word, they began to work. They set up atmospheric purifiers to clear the swarm's toxic spores from the air. They erected water filtration units and distributed nutrient packs. They established field hospitals and began treating the wounded, their technology decades, perhaps centuries, ahead of anything the Council possessed. The most powerful image was broadcast across the entire galactic network. A single human soldier, clad head to toe in intimidating black combat armor, approached a small, frightened Kithran child who was hiding behind a piece of rubble. The soldier was a giant, a faceless warrior of immense power. But instead of raising a weapon, the soldier knelt down on one knee, bringing their helmeted head level with the child. Slowly, the soldier reached into a pouch and produced a single nutrient-rich ration bar. They held it out in their gauntleted hand. The camera focused on this simple, quiet act of humanity amidst the devastation. This was not conquest. This was restoration. This was the act of a landlord returning to an estate that had fallen into disrepair and patiently beginning to clean house. And once the galaxy was watching, captivated by this strange mixture of ruthless efficiency and profound compassion, the second message came. Every screen, every public display, every private data pad in every system suddenly went black. All communications were hijacked. For a full 10 seconds, there was only a silent, empty void. Then a voice spoke. It was not the same voice as before. This one was synthetic, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. It spoke with the finality of a machine stating a fact. Your crimes have been recorded. Stand down or you will be judged. The message repeated once, then the screens returned to normal. The reaction was instantaneous and chaotic. On the Council news feed, I saw one of the high-ranking warlords, the one who had advocated for letting the swarm weaken his rivals, roar in fury and shatter his monitor with a mailed fist. I saw another, the slick diplomat Valerius, collapse into his chair, his face as white as a sheet, the mask of calm superiority finally broken. And on a remote outpost, I saw the feet of an old partisan leader, a man whose people, legend said, had once sheltered humans long ago. He looked up at the sky, his wrinkled face a complex mask of awe, hope, and profound fear. It was then we understood. This was not a war for territory. This was a reckoning. To understand their justice, you must first understand their pain. A pain that the galaxy itself had inflicted and then tried to bury under the dust of forgotten time. For years after their return, scholars and historians scrambled for answers. Why were they so cold? So unforgiving? The answer wasn't found in a military briefing, but in the quietest, most secure place in the galaxy, the Council's Grand Archive. It was there that an old archivist named Lorian, a man who had spent his life curating the official, sanitized version of history, finally acted on a lifetime of doubt. The official record of humanity's fall had always felt too neat, too convenient. Using clearance codes that hadn't been active in a century, he navigated the silent data halls to a sealed sector, one that was not on any public index. Its designation was simple and chilling, Erasure Protocol 001. A soft holographic AI shimmered into existence before him. Sector 7 Gamma is sealed by order of the First Council, the AI chimed pleasantly. The data within is classified as a historical anomaly. Access is not advised. An anomaly I must see, Lorian whispered, his old heart pounding. He overrode the warning. The archive opened. What he found was not a single file, but a collection of old, grainy, holographic recordings, a secret history. He played the first one. File 1. The recording was dated thousands of years ago. It showed the council chamber of that era. The leaders, long dead, were debating in hushed, serious tone. A mystic was presenting evidence of a prophecy, a judgment day, when humanity would rise to hold the galaxy to account. After the mystic left, the High Chancellor of that time spoke. This prophecy, however unlikely, presents an unacceptable risk to the stability of our great council, he said calmly. Therefore, we must approve the final solution to the human problem as a necessary precaution. They voted. It was unanimous. File 2, this was not a debate. It was raw footage. Lorian watched in horror as magnificent human monuments on a dozen worlds were reduced to rubble by demolition charges. He saw digital libraries containing millennia of human art, science, and history being systematically corrupted by data viruses, their contents dissolving into meaningless code. It was a cultural genocide executed with bureaucratic efficiency. File 3, the final recording, showed a group of council officials drafting a document. It was the official report on humanity's disappearance. Lorian recognized the words. They were in every history text. After a prolonged and tragic civil war, the human race has regrettably driven itself to extinction. Their file is now closed. They signed it, their faces showing not sadness, but relief. Lorian leaned back from the console, his face ashen. His entire life, his entire understanding of history was a lie. He had been a keeper of lies. Driven by a need to see it all, he dug deeper and found one last file. It was an audio log, heavily corrupted, flagged for immediate deletion, but somehow missed. He played it. There was no video, only sound. Static, the distant sound of explosions, in a voice, choked with tears and raw with hatred. It was a survivor. They took everything, the voice rasped, broken but burning with a cold fire. Our homes, our worlds, our stars. They thought they could erase us. Burn our books, shatter our statues, pretend we never were. But they will never take this memory. We will not die. We will wait, and we will never forget. The audio cut out. Lorian sat in the silence of the archive, the weight of 1,000 years of lies pressing down on him. The crime wasn't war. War was common. The crime was erasure, the attempt to delete an entire people from existence and then pretend they had never been there at all. It was a crime the galaxy was now finally about to answer for.